Patrik Laine is a Montreal Canadian, and no, I definitely did not gag saying that. Just sounds a little bit weird, doesn't it?
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, so Patrik Laine is a Montreal Canadian, and in perhaps circumstances that somebody on Twitter did actually call about half a month ago. A lot of folks thought that this account, Hockey Insider, I don't know how you emphasize it with as many R's as, but basically this account said that Laine was getting traded to Montreal for Jordan Harris, and there would be another pick going with Laine to the Habs. So, that one actually ended up being real. It was a legit source, I guess. The trade happened almost exactly the way it was called, and I find it very interesting because there was no salary retention on this deal, right? Montreal's eating the whole contract, and I think in a lot of ways, it actually makes sense from Montreal's perspective. I think if you're looking at a safe bet, relatively speaking, for a team that's still in the rebuilding stages, still trying to figure out what it is going forward, Laine, he's 26, 27, still pretty young, but he's also a huge gamble. But if you're a team like Montreal and all you had to give up was Jordan Harris, who's a really solid maybe 4 or 5D on most teams, and you also get paid a 2026 second rounder in exchange, I mean, you really can't be too upset. You get a free draft pick, you get Laine, who might actually still be decent, and all you had to give up was a middle pairing defender for the potential to have a 30-goal scorer on your team. Now, I think a lot of reactions from Montreal Canadiens fans have been a little bit more than I would say they should be feeling, right? I think there's natural excitement, and I think that's good. I think they should be excited. Please take care of Laine, Habs fans, if you're listening. I know y'all have sometimes been a little harsh on some of the players who have a goalless streak, but Laine is he's a sensitive guy. He just came out of a pretty rough situation with Columbus, so please treat our boy gently. But here's where I would say there's some reason for not necessarily caution, but measuring expectations. For one thing, Montreal's still rebuilding, right? So you look at their forward group, and it's okay, but it's pretty distant from like a top cup contender. I'd say it's probably not that dissimilar to something of what the Jets have had the past couple of seasons when Winnipeg has a bad injury run. So there's definitely talent to work with, and I think that team has, reason to grow, and there's certainly a future excitement. But I don't think that Laine necessarily moves the needle into contender status. He's going to be most likely pretty good, but I think for one thing, for the first couple weeks, maybe even couple months, there's probably going to be some adjustments. He hasn't played in a while. And, this is the first time he's been healthy in some months, whether physically or mentally, all of it, he seems to be in a better spot. So I find this one interesting. I think for Montreal, it's actually a very good bet, because if Laine does really well and he kills it this season, maybe you think about trading him again and eating some of that salary. The Habs basically got paid to take on his deal, giving up one roster player that's certainly no scrub. Jordan Harris is pretty decent. He's kind of like a DeMello light of sorts, a really good defender, although more in a limited role than like a top pairing kind of thing. But they also got a draft pick with it, right? So you now have an asset that you might actually be able to turn into really good futures. Because I think long term, I mean, there's a chance that Laine does really well and maybe wants to stick around at Montreal. But if you're the Habs, I kind of feel like he doesn't quite fit the timeline. By the time his contract ends, he's going to be 27 or 28, which is still, a pretty good age. But once you sign a long-term deal with him, you do have to worry about his injury history. He does get hurt a lot, and he misses a lot of time. And once he gets to 30 or so, there's a decent chance that as he ages through that deal, it's going to start to become a bigger and bigger issue. Now, maybe it's a conditioning thing and he gets back into shape and things are totally fine. But to me, there's just a lot of inherent risk with this. And so I feel like having him on a 2-year deal is actually perfect. If you think about what flexibility you can offer if you retain salary on him, Laine as like a $6 million player to a team might be worth a fortune at either a summer trade or a trade deadline. I'm telling you, like, that could be a killer acquisition for some team. And Montreal basically got Laine for almost nothing. So I think in a lot of ways, this is a really smart gamble. I think for the Habs, this is a great deal. And I also think that for Columbus, I'm kind of wondering what they're doing. For one thing, they basically had to pay to get his whole salary off the books, which is fine. But usually you do that if you think that you can make some acquisitions to improve your team. And with Don Waddell, I just don't know if I really trust him to know where the Jackets are. They're not a good team. They're a rebuilder. And certainly they have a lot of exciting talent in the pipelines, but so far that franchise just seems extraordinarily dysfunctional. There's constant infighting, lots of rumors. It just came out that Laine and Merzlikins were part of a battle inside the locker room with a group of players at the time who were of their core about 4 years ago. None of them are there anymore, but it just shows you that the dysfunction of the Jackets has been a continuing problem. I feel bad for Columbus fans. I feel like they deserve better. That team really shouldn't be in the state that it's been in. So Waddell hopefully doesn't screw up this whole cap space gift that he now has. And, with Harris, I think he's going to be pretty nice for them. But the one thing that Columbus really didn't need was more defenders. Obviously they have a couple of guys who are a little bit on the pricier side, but I think if you're looking at their blue line, they've got more talent from the prospect pool to fill those gaps in than they do up front. And that's why I've kind of still thought about a McGroarty trade, because that continues to be a really good destination. But now I sort of wonder what the return would be, right? Now that Laine is off to Montreal, the Jets would probably look to try for like a Jiricek or a Johnson. And I don't know if either of those guys are really touchable right now. Maybe Columbus views it differently, but from my perspective, I thought Laine would have been part of any sort of return. So with that off the table, obviously a McGroarty trade becomes a bigger challenge, but I still kind of, at the end of the day, I do wonder if McGroarty just ends up still playing for Winnipeg. I don't know. That's still an open question, but as far as this trade is concerned for Montreal, I think it's a smart bet. I think it gives you a ton of options once Montreal has him for about a year. Get him back into game shape, prove that he can still be a really effective goal scorer, and maybe, just maybe, if you're interested, you could potentially get a massive haul for him in a deal as a rental. Maybe that actually be the way that he comes back to Winnipeg, is if, say next season, Montreal wants to deal with Winnipeg. They have some retained salary. They get him down to maybe $5.5 million for one season or something, or less at the trade deadline. I think that could be a real match, because I'm sure the Jets would have assets that, Montreal would be interested in. Maybe that's actually how you get to some kind of like a McGroarty trade, is that you retain on Laine and maybe move some other stuff as part of that package. But I mean, either way, there's tons of options. I'm sure Laine is going to enjoy playing on a new team. Like I said, though, just, if you're a Habs fan and you're listening, just treat him gently. He's a good dude, and I know he's been through the ringer recently, but I promise you, if you're patient with him, I do think he will come good. And if he does decide to stick around long term, he is a pretty cool player. So hopefully they get to enjoy those clappers for the time being. But man, does it still kind of sting a little bit and feel a little bit gross to say that he's a Canadian. It just doesn't sit well with me as a Winnipeg fan, but that's fine, right? All I hope for him is that, he has a bright and happy future. But sort of in more Jets-related news, there is a Jets winger who we're still trying to figure out what exactly is going on with his contract. Obviously, things are still in motion. I'm sure the Jets are still trying to figure all of this out. I think that there's some bigger, longer-term questions for this org, but none probably bigger right now than what sort of contract Cole Perfetti is about to get. We'll chat about that in just a moment. But before we go any further, just wanted to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. We all know that when you're building a championship team, you've got to assemble a carefully handpicked roster, one that's got great chemistry, one that works well together. And you know what? Maintaining your vehicle is much the same way. eBay Motors has everything you need to keep your vehicle in tip-top shape and level it up to peak performance. They've got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting about some stuff around the whole Laine deal. Obviously, for the Jets, that was a big winger question. It's now been answered, unfortunately, for the Jets. I was kind of holding out some vague, slight hope that maybe somehow, against all odds, he would come back to Winnipeg. But I mean, that was always a pretty distant reality, right? I don't think we truly expected that to be a thing. So it is what it is, right? You know, I think if you're kind of thinking about this in the long term, it probably was for the best that the Jets maybe didn't go this route. But, you know, it is what it is. I mean, I would have welcomed Laine back with open arms, but I know a lot of you probably were a little more mixed on those thoughts. And that's fair, right? Laine's last stint here was, well, it was kind of a mixed bag, and I think that there were some challenges in getting him to be at his absolute best when you had as much scoring talent as the Jets did back then. And so it is what it is, right? But the Jets can actually kind of restore some good vibes with one particular signing that we're still kind of waiting for. You know, that deal, of course, is Cole Perfetti, and I want to chat about that in just a moment. But just wanted to also let you know that, you know, for all of you who are interested, I would highly recommend making your second listen our Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Now, like I said, Cole Perfetti, his contract situation continues to be not necessarily, like a big problem for the Jets, but I think a big question in terms of how exactly you kind of work around this, right? I think the Jets are trying to figure out, is this going to be a long-term thing? Is it going to be a short-term thing? What exactly is his interest, and can we lock him up? The reason I just bring this up now again, which, you know, I know is something we've talked about for the past couple of weeks, Matty Beniers just signed his deal with Seattle. It's $7 by a little over $7 million per season, which is, in my mind, a really smart gamble. I think if you're the Kraken, it's a very fair contract for a player who just continues to be a top six menace. And Beniers himself is getting a ton of guaranteed salary on a long-term contract. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a great deal for both sides. And, you know, given how Seattle seasons have been recently and sort of the decision-making in the front office, I got to say this one actually ticks off boxes that I would say makes it a pretty winning contract. The reason it's relevant for the Jets is, here again, Beniers is another potential comparable for Perfetti. Now, Beniers has a more proven track record, I would say, at this point, and also has a bigger role. With Perfetti, you're still kind of banking more on some more limited priors, but it's a bet that I think is actually pretty fair, and it's why I think if you can get him locked up for 4 to 5 years, maybe even 6, at around $5.5 to $6 million, I think you're going to really make out on this deal. Beniers actually had a very similar number of points last season, but was playing a much bigger role with the Kraken. He was getting almost 18 minutes a night, whereas Perfetti was getting like 14 a night, sometimes even less, right? And I think if you're looking at his overall point totals the past season, 38 points, 71 games, 13 and a half minutes a night, there is a lot of reason to believe that Perfetti's growth potential this season under Arniel is going to be like moonshot good. If he was a rookie, I think he'd probably be in the Calder running. Last year, he had 30 points in 51 games, and I think with an increase in role and renewed confidence, more offensive support from his line mates, all I can say is I think Perfetti is primed for a big season. And it's why I continue to really push for the idea of getting him signed long-term. I still think that if you do like a 6x6 kind of contract, you are going to make out like a bandit. People are going to look at me like I'm crazy, but the thing is you can't just look at this at a surface level and say, well, he doesn't have the production that's there yet. The thing with him is you sort of bank on there being some really promising signs that Perfetti is going to be a Jet star in the future. His scoring rates relative to his ice time are like among the best on the Jets. His primary scoring rates have been crazy. He's one of the highest primary point producers per 60 minutes, which is great. I think if you're looking at, rate scoring, he is, again, one of the top creators on the team. He doesn't actually have as much in the way of shot attempt volume. He's not really a big shooter, or at least wasn't in previous years. And all that said, he still had 19 goals this past season. So for me, I think Perfetti really has a dynamite level of potential. And I've always believed in him since he was drafted because he's such a smart player. He reads the game at an elite level. And I think his potential for Winnipeg is just, I mean, he really is something special. He's one of those guys that I've really identified as part of Winnipeg's longer-term future. And if Arniel is really trying to sell him on this vision of being a key player, then, I really hope that he decides to lock it up with the Jets, because having that cost certainty for the next few years is great. It helps you work around some of your longer-term questions. You identify a core piece that you no longer have to try and negotiate with and sort of worry about for the future. But I also understand that from Perfetti's perspective, if he decides to opt for the bridge. But all I can say is if he goes for the bridge, he's going to be more like $7.5 million to $8 million at the end of his next couple of seasons. He's going to be that good. I feel pretty confident. The only thing that's going to hold him back is if he gets injured. Otherwise, I think if he stays healthy, he is going to be lights out. I really believe that. I know some people are going to disagree with me, but sorry, that's just my assessment. I really think that of our young talents, Cole is one of the brightest. And what's really interesting about him is that he has a stronger, more prolific defensive impact than he does offensively. He's like really responsible when it comes to heading off opposing skaters. He'll read those routes along the walls really well. He intercepts passes and forces turnovers. He's just a very high-level, high-skill player. And those guys who have like a really high IQ are the ones that you need to identify and lock up. Why? Because those players actually have the most room for growth. The smarter players who also are blessed with really strong tools are really rare. And with Perfetti, he's not the fastest, and that is kind of an issue at times, but he compensates well in other areas. He knows where he's strong and where he's weak, and he makes up for it brilliantly and really plays off of quality line mates quite beautifully. Like when he was working with Connor, I thought that their natural chemistry that seemed to spring up almost immediately was phenomenal. So for me, I think there's really no reason not to try and pursue a longer term deal. I think if anything, it's going to be more on the agent and Perfetti himself being a little bit hesitant to want to lock up with a team that thus far hasn't really given him the role that I think he was expecting. But this year, I think that changes. I think Arniel is really pushing for youth. I think Perfetti is very clearly in Arniel's longer-term plans. And the fact that Perfetti was one of the first players that Arniel talked about heading into this offseason as soon as he was named head coach really speaks volumes about how he views him. Y'all may not like him, but I can tell you the Jets coaching staff probably does. And I think Perfetti is going to prove why he is such a truly special talent this season. He's my biggest breakout candidate, more so than any of the rookies. I think Cole is primed for a big season. And I'm very interested to know how he does in preseason and whether or not he convinces the Jets coaching staff that he should actually get a look at center. I know Nemesnikov currently has the inside track there, but I honestly wonder if Perfetti as the center might be even better. The one thing I will say is that once he moves there, I do wonder if his defensive impact, especially along the flanks, is a little bit more muted because he's going to have to occupy a different part of the ice. He's going to be making different defensive reads, and so there's some questions there. But I think overall, whatever role he plays for this team, I'm just expecting a big season from him, and I am very excited. If he gets locked up here in the next couple of weeks, I mean, that for me is one of the best things the Jets can do this offseason. I know that this offseason has kind of sucked in some respects, although I think the nice thing is that Winnipeg hasn't gotten caught doing anything too stupid yet. So a Perfetti long-term deal would probably be about as good as you could ask for. So some fun stuff there. But of course, the Jets are actually approaching preseason here pretty soon, just a couple of weeks away, really. And with the opening slate of games, thought we would chat a little bit about what I'm hoping to see and sort of what I'm expecting from their first couple of games before the regular season kicks in October. But before we chat about all of that fun stuff, just wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at Indeed. We're all driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to hire and search for a candidate isn't to hire at all, or isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed, because Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors. And of course, they do all of the busy work. They help you schedule, screen, and message so you can get to hiring quality candidates faster. And they don't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. And, you know, as somebody who's actually used Indeed myself, I can personally confirm that it works really well. I filled out their whole application process. There was tons of great detail, and it actually matched me with a lot of positions that not only align to my personal work experiences, but also my salary requirements, different things like that. And for employers who are trying to find good candidates, which, let's be real, can be a bit of a challenge these days, it couldn't be easier. I have to imagine that businesses have to love this stuff, and it's why there's over 3.5 million businesses worldwide that already use Indeed. So join them right now, because our listeners get a special $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just checking out, the upcoming schedule for Winnipeg. Obviously, it's going to be a fun one, I guess. We have preseason finally around the corner. Look, it's been an interminable wait for the Jets to come back. The first round exit left a pretty crappy taste in all of our mouths, and I'm just honestly excited to have hockey back. It's been way too long. And I think more than other seasons, I'm actually really excited about this one because we're finally moving as an org in a direction that I feel is positive, right? The commitment to youth, the discussion of using more data science, hopefully a more modern and progressive approach to how, the team is managed offensively. All that stuff makes me interested to know what this year is going to be like. We're going to have a lot of kids playing. We're going to have some young talent elevated into prime roles. We're going to have some great returning vets. And we're also going to have a team that, quite honestly, does not have a lot of roster depth. So, the kids are going to have to be forced into bigger positions and bigger opportunities, which hopefully they really seize with, great enthusiasm. Heading into preseason, I think there's obviously some big questions. 2C remains one of the top ones. Perfetti's longer-term contract is certainly another one. But of course, Lambert and Chibrikov, I'm sure, are among two of the biggest names on everybody's lips. Lambert especially, because everyone keeps saying he's going to be the 2C this year, and it's not going to happen. I'm sorry. I think he might get a look there, and I think he might even have a game there or two. But I think overall, most of his center role will probably be in preseason. I think the Jets are probably looking to play him as a winger first this year, and I think it actually isn't that hard for him to translate over. I think he actually plays center better for the most part. But I think with the Jets roster being the way it is and how hard the 2C role is for young players these days, I just don't think that they're going to try and push him into that role when we're still not quite sure that his decision-making speed is there yet, right? He needs to get NHL level reps in one game. Last year is not going to be enough. Preseason is not going to be enough. Winnipeg needs to kind of be patient, and I think that's what they're going to do. I know a lot of people are rushing for it. I know myself, I've said at times, I really hope that he runs with it and immediately takes over and becomes the stud offensive player at the start, but I just don't think that that's the most likely scenario. I think Brad's going to take some time to really cook up, and I think it's important to let him marinate without necessarily holding him with kitty gloves. I think the Jets can give him a nice role with this team this year without necessarily asking him to carry such a huge burden immediately. But best case scenario, he runs with it and proves that he can do it and starts earning promotions. That is like a dreamlike scenario. I think that'd be great. But I think in preseason, I just want to see where he's at this point. We haven't really had a chance to see him against comparable NHL level competition, and it's not like preseason is necessarily going to give him that, but it's going to give us a better sense of, all right, against other players and his peers that he might see at this level, how does he look so far? He didn't look out of place in his first NHL game, but let's be honest, those circumstances for that game were generally throwaway. I know people will talk about the playoff seeding, but no one cares about that because it wasn't like the Jets were going to see Vancouver for several weeks. So it really was a low stakes game, relatively speaking. All that said, he still performed well. So, I don't want to take away and diminish that. It's just, I think it's important to remember the context of how things are, because once you get into the regular season, you're going to be faced with teams really fighting tooth and nail for playoff spots. Now, the preseason will kick off on September 21st. It'll be a home game against the Minnesota Wild, followed by an away game the next evening and afternoon against the Oilers. Then the Jets are back here in Winnipeg on the 25th, and then they'll go on the road for one of their last few preseason games against the Wild on the 27th, and their final preseason game will be against the Calgary Flames, which is actually also their season opener just a couple of nights after that, at home on October 2nd. So, there's quite a few opportunities here. Once you get into preseason, obviously it's going to be like somebody on Twitter called it like the longest 2 weeks before the start of the season, and that's probably true. But we've been waiting without hockey for a couple months now, anyways. So at this point, a few extra weeks really doesn't hurt. I think this is going to be a really interesting evaluation period. I really don't have any expectations. I'm not even sure what this team is going to be like this year. I have some ideas and I have some broad stroke visions about how the squad's going to be, but generally speaking, Winnipeg 2024-25 season, bit of a mystery box. And so preseason for me is exciting. I'm actually looking forward to it. I want to see what Arneal's ideas are like. I want to see how the special teams are. The special teams are probably my biggest question. Is the PK going to look functional? Will the power play be good? Lots of stuff to really unpack there, because those two can really make or break and push your team over the edge if you're a halfway decent 5v5 team. But the thing is the Jets were generally solid at 5v5, defensively sound, offensively a little bit of a mixed bag, and the special teams were just, they weren't special at all, right? So lots to consider here. I'd be curious to know what you're looking out for in preseason. As we get closer, I'm sure I'll talk about it more, especially a couple of players that I'm keeping an eye on for either the inside track for roster spots or guys who maybe have a long shot but could really impress and wow us with preseason and camp performances. But let me know what you're excited about in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with more Jets offseason coverage, so see you then. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.